Ethan, it's great to reconnect with you. A lot has happened since we last talked, and literally here within the last hour or so, we just got some breaking news about CZ stepping down. So definitely want to touch on that with you. Also, you've transitioned in terms of your career. I know you are very developer focused, and I love getting your insight because me personally, I believe that what's happening on the development side translates into the direction that we go as an industry. So would love to get your insights on some of the things that you're seeing on the development side, some of the work that you've been doing. So let's jump right in. This whole CZ news about him stepping down. What do you make of it?
It's it shocked me when I first saw it. You messaged me on Telegram and you're like, "Hey, let's cover the CZ thing," and I googled it, and it was like 5 minutes after, like before you sent me that. I guess he pled guilty to charges for, what was it, breaching anti-money laundering laws, and then stepped down from Binance, which is wild. I mean, that is an industry-changing move, especially in the regulatory landscape. Like, typically, I have a somewhat neutral opinion on regulation. Especially, I think that it's a really fine line between things that significantly harm user adoption. And when it comes to like AMLs, I think that they are a significant blocker for adoption, to be honest. And it was interesting to see how strictly they enforced it with CZ in this case. Because I mean, being when I first got into Web3, Binance was my first onboarding point. And I remember it being so difficult for me to get in because of the stringency on anti-money laundering laws, because of the fact that you need to submit so much to actually start using the platform. So I was really surprised to see that news today. It definitely kind of caught me at an interesting angle.
Yeah, I do agree, and it shows how important regulation is to the industry, and it shows that the government bodies, they're taking it very seriously and they're going to come after you, right? It's maybe putting more emphasis on ZK technology and how important that's going to be moving forward. My concern with this, and I'm not saying that CZ is a saint. I haven't looked into it. I mean, I'm not running an investigation here, but I'm just thinking it from a 30,000-foot overview. I'm hearing the news about Kraken, and now this news around Binance. My concern is that the government is going after these exchanges, so that way we, as retail users, are not able to self-custody. And that is my concern, because as we're making room here for Ethereum ETF, Bitcoin ETF, all this is great, but how great is it if the downside to all this is they're going to take away our ability to self-custody? Because now you have, you can go through an institution to purchase these ETFs. So it's almost like, great, we're getting more adoption. Well, not so fast, because now they're taking away our ability to be able to self-custody. That's my concern, that they're headed in that direction. And I'm not as worried about Coinbase, because Coinbase is going to be working with BlackRock. So here in the States, I don't think that is going to be an issue, although they are facing their own legal battles. But I'm just thinking long term, do you think that is what's happening?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that using Web3, we talk a lot about onboarding people and creating this sort of like next billion users and real adoption. But I think a lot of time we overlook the fact that at the absolute entry point of this is actually getting money into crypto, getting people into crypto and getting their funds, right? So that they can start using applications on chain. Now, the fact that doing that, especially in the US right now, is so difficult, and the government is going after these different organizations that function primarily as a method of getting liquidity on chain, and then of course using that in your own wallet. Now you have other services. You have various different on-ramp providers. There's a lot of them that also help with this. Although if you've ever used one, then you know that in a lot of cases these also have very strict and often rigid onboarding requirements, especially if you're getting in any significant amount of money, because of the how strict the U.S. government is in terms of. I think it all stems from in the fact that crypto has historically been seen as a high risk industry, primarily due to money laundering, and it makes sense in some regard because it's possible with Web3, and it's definitely a risk, but it's been taken to an extreme where, for example, the CZ situation today, or just how difficult it is to get money into Web3, even with organizations that have service in the US, like many different on-ramp providers. Even with that, it is incredibly difficult to get any significant amount of money from an individual standpoint into Web3. And if it takes, a 30-minute verification process, or even 15 minutes if you optimize it, to get a user at like $20 or $50 in Web3, this is a huge part of onboarding that is fundamentally broken at the moment for people in the US. I don't know what this is going to look like in the future. I think that with the current path, it is unfortunately not looking great for this core issue, especially now with what just happened over the past few hours. Sort of Binance recognizing that I guess they did indeed, in this case, break those requirements, which I actually wasn't even aware that was something that they were breaching. Because from my experience, they were also quite strict in terms of the actual onboarding process and adhering to those. But I think that if this continues in this direction, the U.S. continues to see Web3 as this high risk industry in regards to regulation and whatnot, and they are as aggressive as they currently are with these different exchanges and the process of getting fiat into Web3, then this is quite concerning. And you even have like institutions like Chase, for example. I think they made an announcement. What was this? A few months ago, maybe, where they said that they are going to start blocking transactions that they think have something to do with crypto, which is shocking. Now, I think if this happens both on the regulation level as well as institutions deciding unanimously that they want to restrict general access in terms of fiat onboarding to Web3, we have a significant issue in terms of actually getting people into Web3. It doesn't matter how much intelligent UX we have. If there is no possibility or if it's very difficult to actually initiate that fundamental part of the onboarding process. So from my perspective, that's probably one of the number one issues we're facing with this type of regulation.
And your perspective is really important here because you are not only an investor yourself, and of course, a lot of people view crypto as an investment, but more importantly, you work with developers, people that are building like real applications that are utilizing blockchain technology to solve for real world problems. So to your point, if we can't get new users to use this technology and not learn it, then it's going to stifle innovation. And again, yes, people will be able to purchase, buy shares of an ETF and view it as an investment vehicle that's regulated. But from a user adoption and actually using these applications with real utility, that's the part where we in this space, we're working so hard to try to get people to understand, right? And it's making it more challenging to do that with these types of scenarios.
Absolutely. There's a lot of the goal for most people right now is this concept of the next billion users, right? This is kind of like the kind of a buzz term that people tend to use, but has a lot of truth to it because at the end of the day, investing and being in crypto for the price action is great. That's how I got into Web3 as well. But at the end of the day, like a lot of what we're trying to build is an ecosystem that is capable of actually creating applications that people want to use, right? And that more so than people want to use, it actually improves significantly upon the existing Web2 model and add a lot of utility in that regard. And the possibilities are absolutely there. There's a ton of cool use cases that are currently being built, that have been built, and that will be built in the future that aren't possible in Web2, that are only possible with Web3. But there's a lot of points of friction to actually get to that utilization point. In Web2 right now, you can get started and start using pretty much any Web2 application with nothing more than a Google account or your email, right? I mean, at the moment, that's a very easy process. I think we're getting much closer to that in Web3. But if you need to onboard through MetaMask, generate a seed phrase, write it down. On top of this, you need to find a way to get money into Web3. then you start using an application Web3. This application is complicated. You need to understand how to navigate it, how to execute the steps that you want to get to the endpoint of your sort of goal in Web3, and do all this yourself, discover it yourself, execute it yourself. This is something that it's no surprise that we don't have any onboarding. Is basically the idea here, because fundamentally the ecosystem has been inaccessible at almost every level of the stack, from the on-ramping process of just how, especially in the US, like that's kind of like what I'm talking about in the sense. I think in other countries it's easier, but in the US especially, that has been significantly it's harder now than ever. It's threatened by regulation constantly. Then of course, if you can manage to do that, which it's not impossible, then now you have the wallet management issue, which has been an ongoing problem. And then, of course, you actually have the issue of interacting with Web3, which is still fundamentally complicated. So the fact that all of these things are still in the state that they are today in most applications, I think that we're still like a reasonable length behind any real adoption. But I think the fortunate thing is that, of course, organizations like us, like Particle Network, as well as a ton of different orgs that are basically exclusively focused on just solving this problem, more so on the actual on-chain interaction process. But there's a whole industry being built right now of UX-focused technologies. We're only, of course, one organization in that industry, but it's a very quickly growing vertical. And we're really excited about the potential of shifting Web3 into an industry. Right now it is very blocked off, like I just mentioned, but shifting into an industry that is actually capable of reaching this sort of ambitious goal that we all have of the next billion users. So this is the goal that we have, and I think that we're actually not as far away as some people might think.
And to your point, I do think that having folks like you, Particle Network, trying to help with the onboarding process, I think it'll help in general for the industry to make it more relatable to what people use on a day-to-day basis, and make it less of this very unique, difficult to use, high risk, high reward industry, and make it more just like any other application that you would use, right? So I do think that in order for us to, kind of tying it to what our initial discussion was about, what the government seems to be doing, trying to not allow us to self-custody, and everything goes through, the institution, and stifling innovation. If there's a way for us to be able to break through that barrier and increase user adoption through like networks like Particle, then I think that would help the overall industry get over these regulatory hurdles. So we can make it much more relatable to what traditional applications feel like.
Definitely. And I think like you kind of brought up a decent point there in some regard, in that like from my perspective, actually a big part of Web3, and like maybe why our sort of the government at the moment sees Web3 as in the light that they see it, which is, as you mentioned, this sort of high risk industry. I think is in some capacity stems from the fact that Web3 is very financialized. It's cryptocurrency at the end of the day, right? And everything that we do is financialized, right? Everything is tokens and transactions, and things are trading and investing and these different things. And I think that this might contribute to the problem of the fact that, no wonder that like it's being regulated so heavily, when at the moment Web3 is largely sort of just like decentralized, unregulated, universal financial body. This is a threat in a lot of cases to institutions, to of course, regulatory bodies. So I think a big goal that a lot of organizations have and a lot of applications have is not eliminating this part of Web3, but shifting Web3 from what is right now like the term that we tend to use is an engineer-focused financial sector, which is fundamentally what it is right now. Web3 is extremely engineering focused. Most people that are very active in this space are technical, at least, if not engineers in some capacity. Most like Web3 is very under construction in that regard, and that a lot of people that are here are people that are building, which is great. But it means that because of that, of course, the industry is in a very specific point, and a lot of that ties into the fact that we're very financialized. So I think the goal in some regard is that we'll shift from this engineering-focused financial industry to something that is more focused around users and focused around the applications rather than the actual financial aspects. So like gaming is a really good example of this. I think actually gaming as a whole is shifting from this idea of play to earn, which is a fundamentally financial idea, to things that are more blockchain specific. I think it's important just to like create a distinction here between traditionally what we see as cryptocurrency and what we see as blockchain. Now, blockchain as a technology, as we see it in Web3, has a lot of opportunity beyond things like play to earn or like earning money and kind of the transfer of value. Like fully on-chain games, autonomous worlds. These are a really cool application of blockchain. There's a myriad of other use cases, NFTs, art, these different things. These aren't inherently financial. And they're also not inherently engineering focused in some capacity. They're focused around users and creating applications that leverage the benefits of blockchain to create unique experiences. And I think that as an industry, this is overall the direction that we need to head towards, because until we get to a point where the general opinion of Web3 isn't like, I mean, if you ask most people in the street, it's going to be like Bitcoin. No, wasn't that just at $70,000 and pump and dumps and Ponzi schemes? And Web3 in the eyes of most people right now is not what it actually is in terms of the technological side. And there's a lot there that we just haven't really shared with a large part of the world yet, mostly because it's not quite ready. But I think as we approach that point, we'll see this fundamental shift to more user-centric, experience-focused, application-focused industry, rather than the sort of unfortunate state that we're in right now, which is just as a result of the fact that we're transitioning to that ultimate goal.
Yeah, and before hopping on this podcast, I asked, well, where is Particle Network in terms of market cap? And you mentioned to me like, well, we don't really have a token yet. And to me, in some ways, that's refreshing, because that tells me that you're focused on the actual user experience. You're focused on building the core technology first, and you're trying to find the reason why you would need a token versus just having one just to have one to make money short term. So those are the kinds of people, those are the kinds of builders we don't want in the space, the ones that are trying to get rich quick. And we want more builders that are focused on building real applications. So that was really refreshing to hear. So let's talk about like, what have you guys been building up to this point? Like, what are some of your plans? How are you tackling this whole user experience issue that seems to be really the biggest bottleneck right now, I feel like, in the industry?
For sure. I think the tagline that we tend to use when it comes to kind of describing our approach to this problem and like kind of our solution to it is the intent-centric modular access layer of Web3. Now, this is a little bit confusing if you aren't super in the loop of like niche Web3 technologies, but there's a little bit to unpack here. So this tagline that we use, the intent-centric modular access layer of Web3, refers basically to a collection of technologies that are centered around improving core user experience and specifically cultivating an ecosystem that fundamentally on the actual onboarding interaction level is accessible to normal people and feels natural to use, either adjacent to Web 2 or even easier than Web 2. So this is kind of what we're building towards. And specifically, this includes a few different technologies, at the base of which is something that we call wallet as a service. Very simply, this just refers to the transition of the current wallet structure, which, if you're familiar, basically, if you want to create a wallet in Web3 right now, you download an extension, generate a seed phrase, write that seed phrase down on a piece of paper, go throw it in your fire safe, right? Make sure it's secure, you don't leak it anywhere. And then now you have a wallet that you've downloaded that you can then interact, and it's like generalized for every application. And this is fine and it works, but wallet as a service basically takes a very alternative approach. And instead, you can imagine like in Web 2, right? If you want to use an application, any Web 2 application, web application specifically, oftentimes you'll see a button, sign in with Google or sign in with GitHub or LinkedIn or something, right? When you click on this button, you're using an account that you already have your Google account or your email or something, and creating credentials, an account on this Web2 application that you can then use to interact with that application. So this is a great Web2 user experience, right? Because you have one account that can access a huge variety of applications. So then the question is, why don't we do something like this in Web3? So this is basically what Wallet as a Service does in a large capacity, and that what you can do is, instead of using an extension, you can actually embed a wallet natively into an application, very similar to a native account structure in Web2. So basically, user onboards into this Web3 application with their Google account or their email or their Twitter. This then creates a wallet. It creates an address on pretty much any EVM chain. It can even do like account abstraction and whatnot, that you can then use to facilitate interaction with this application. That interaction is routed through that embedded wallet that the application itself can customize and integrate to feel very seamless and natural within that given app. So instead of a generalized one UI fits all with like MetaMask or something, developers can choose exactly how users onboard and interact with their application through a wallet as a service. So it's taking the wallet experience from an external extension to an internal wallet that is onboarded through using familiar accounts and interacted with in a way that the developer chooses so that it feels natural and seamless for users, rather than feeling like, very Web3 native, right? It feels a lot more Web2 adjacent. So this is great. This actually solves a significant part of the onboarding problem that we spoke briefly about earlier, in that like now as a user, you can get into an application with nothing more than your Google account and start using it on a basic level pretty easily. Like you can ask a normal person on the street and they could figure this out and start using a Web3 application. And this is great, right? This is a big solution. We're not the only ones that build this. There's a number of other organizations that have done similar things. For us, it's always been a focus of creating a really solid developer experience. So a ton of different SDKs and APIs and supporting as many chains as possible, making it easy to integrate and so on. But what we kind of realized actually quite recently is that like crypto user experience isn't limited to just the onboarding process. That's actually only one half of the underlying problem. The UX problem in Web3, if you're forgetting about like the on-ramp side and like actually getting money in, purely on the actual on-chain interaction, right? Once a user is into Web3, we actually call this the point of onboarding to the point of expression. So getting a user into Web3 and getting them to the point where they can express what they want to do, this has been solved by Wallet as a Service. The second part of this problem, I think, is probably the most important part, is the point of expression to the point of outcome. Basically, what this means is the actual interaction utilization process of Web3. So you have something that you want to do, something that you want to express, and you have an outcome that you want. At the moment in Web3, regardless of if you're using MetaMask or a wallet as a service, this requires a few things from the user. First, it requires the user to know the path that they need to take to get to their desired outcome. So for example, if you have 100 Matic on Polygon, right? And you want to spend 40 Matic, or the equivalent of 40 Matic, to buy an NFT on Base and play a game on Base with that NFT. At the moment, this requires 4 or 5 individual transactions, and a user has to discover every transaction sequentially that they need to do to get to that endpoint of playing that game on Base from the 40 Matic that they have on Polygon. This is a big assumption and a big task to put on general users, to know how to navigate blockchain and understand the ecosystem well enough to be able to discover the exact path they need to take to do a relatively complex action. Even on the application level, this exists, right? If you want to interact with a maybe complex DeFi application or even a game that requires on-chain transactions, doing so requires a sequential and very raw level of interaction with the blockchain, which is a problem. And then not only in discovery, the user also has to go ahead and actually execute this manually. So the answer to this, and maybe we can talk more about this in a bit, is intents. So this is basically changing the idea of a user having to discover all this themselves, saying, well, why don't we actually discover this for the user? We know what the user wants. They have a starting point. They have an input that they want, and they have an output that they want. So why don't we just have them tell that to us and then figure out everything that needs to happen in between those 2 points to make the outcome happen, and then doing that for the user, saving all of the actual cognitive work required from the user, and all they need to do is basically express what they want and then doing that for them. This is fundamentally what intents are, and this is the second half of the problem that we're addressing with our tech stack. A few things go into this. We're also doing like some privacy-centric technologies with things like ZK. to ensure that the actual onboarding process is private and confidential. But that's kind of like the high level overview. This, of course, will include a token launch somewhere in the next few months to power a few of the architectural components behind this, like our ZK EVM, to coordinate a lot of cross-chain activity. This topic runs really deep. There's a ton of like technical components of this, but at the core of it is addressing both halves of this UX problem to create user experience that feels very natural and feels either equal or better than Web 2 in a lot of cases.
So going back to the wallet as a service, you mentioned the ability to essentially use your email, right? To be able to onboard. What in that particular instance, if we're using our emails from a privacy perspective, because you mentioned that's something that you're also working on through ZK technology, but in that specific instance, like what is the user giving up by using their email?
It's a really good question. This is something that we've been sort of battling with for a long time. And that, like, whenever you use your email or use your Google account, right, to sign in with a wallet as a service, right, and sign into an application. Unfortunately, what you're doing in most cases, including with our service, but with any wallet as a service, right, you're actually creating a link between those two accounts in the backend, right? And sometimes this will be made available to the developer of the application. Sometimes just the wallet as a service, depends on the specific implementation. But still, somewhere there's a link between your Google account or your email or whatever else you're signing in with and your wallet, right? So this is a concern for a lot of people because this isn't private, right? You're basically giving up any level of anonymity, at least between Web 2 and Web 3, by signing in with this way. So this is, especially for Web 3 natives and even for some people in Web 2, you want to be able to use Web 3 in a way that's anonymous in some capacity. And sacrificing all of that just to sign in with your Google account is a trade-off that a lot of people aren't comfortable making. So they just rather stick with the normal process of authentication with your MetaMask or something to preserve that level of privacy. So then the question comes up, how do we maintain that convenience of onboarding without sacrificing fundamental privacy in that onboarding process? With sacrificing that by linking the two accounts and the two identities. Our answer to that is actually utilization of ZK proofs. So this is something that we call ZK WAS, Zero Knowledge Wallet as a Service. And basically just represents a shift from the current onboarding process to something that we call confidential logins. So the same sign-in process, but instead, basically what we do at like a high level is that we generate a ZK proof that we use for authentication rather than the actual credentials of the like the details of the account itself, that we can then authenticate a user without actually knowing the specific details, the email or the name and so on, of their underlying account that they're authenticating with. So we can do the same authentication, but without knowledge and saving that information in our backend, preserving a significant level of privacy over what we had before. So this is something that we're working on. We actually just released a big article about this, I think last week. We're going to launch it hopefully quite soon. And we think it'll be a pretty significant evolution and fix to a lot of problems that people have pretty universally with wallet as a service.
That's very interesting. Seems like that timing wise, it was a good question. Definitely send me the link to that, Ethan. I can include that in the description. I personally would love to read up a little bit about that because it's all about finding that fine line, right? How do you increase the user experience while at the same time preserving that privacy? It's a very, very challenging, tall order. And it's great to hear that you guys are trying to tackle that. And I'm excited about the development that's happening and the solutions that you are providing. And also you mentioned that in the near future, you also have a token. And maybe maybe at that point I can have you back on and learn a little bit more about that token and what kind of utility it provides, what kind of benefits people get. So any parting thoughts for the listeners, Ethan? Anything you would like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think kind of some takeaways that I think maybe are important to understand, especially on the side of UX. I just got back from basically 3 weeks traveling and meeting different people, different organizations, particularly in this vertical. First, it was Solana Breakpoint, and I know that you just had an episode with Jeff from Web3 Builders Alliance. They're awesome, known them for a long time. And the Solana ecosystem is doing awesome things. I mean, they're killing it. So I was out there in Amsterdam for Solana Breakpoint for a while, and then I went from there over to Istanbul for DevConnect. And throughout all these conversations, I think something that surprised me actually was that even from my own expectations, I think that we're much closer to a user-centric, very UX-focused ecosystem than a lot of people think. I think in the next 12 months, that might be even like a pessimistic prediction. I think in the next 12 months, we're going to see a major evolution in UX, that most applications will be accessible, not only in the onboarding process, but in the actual interaction process to Web2 users. And I think that what this will create is in tandem with kind of what we're seeing, which is upwards price action and the potential of approved ETFs and whatnot. I think this is going to create an ecosystem that actually achieves a lot of the ideals that I talked about earlier, which is, this not financialized, like application specific, consumer ready industry. I actually think that this is something achievable in like the large scale of things, like in somewhat short term. And I'm really excited. I think that like, especially in the intent space and the wallet as a service space and the kind of abstraction space, these solutions being built to improve the underlying experience here for developers and for users are very significant. I'm really, really excited about the things that are going to come out just over the next 2 months, but specifically everything's going to come out over the next year. I think by then we're going to be in a much better position, especially in the UX side, and that we'll have technologies matured enough to the point where these like onboarding flows and interaction flows that feel natural and feel adjacent to Web2 will be the standard for applications. So this is something that I'm quite excited about. And of course, we're very dedicated to building at Particle. And I think it's something to be very optimistic about. And that's the direction that I see the industry moving as a whole.
That's exciting to hear. And I know you're very close to a lot of developers. You go to a lot of these conferences, as you mentioned, Breakpoint, you were at Dev Connect. So you travel globally talking to some of the smartest builders. So it's interesting to hear, and I'm excited for it. I mean, I'm here for it. I'm ready for it. And I'm looking forward to it. I will say that I think besides the actual user experience of the application, a lot of that also has to do with the tokenomics, if there is a token associated with it. And I know that there are a lot of tokenomic experts that are working hard to figure out a sustainable model where you don't have the super high volatility of it going straight up and then dropping, falling face flat, losing 94% of its users, which is scary part is that's usually the average, of like some of these applications that are being built. Like for instance, like friend.tech, I want to say they lost like 94% of their users. So clearly people are still in it for the money, but if we create a better experience for these users, then perhaps that would create a more sustainable model.
Yeah, I think honestly, like something that I've said before is at some point we're going to have, hopefully, like ideally, our sort of ChatGPT moment as an ecosystem, where there's going to be some use case or maybe multiple use cases that make people realize that like there's actual utility here beyond just making money with things like Frontech's super cool, but like the reason why it got so popular is because people were making money from it. Like in Web3, like that's where most people tend to go to at the moment, which is fine. But I think really what I hope to see is some sort of application that shows the true potential of Web3 in terms of creating things that feel unique and feel specific to Web3 in terms of what they enable. And I think that as we approach the possibility for making these things, which to be honest, an application like that hasn't been possible for a long time and still isn't probably. But I think this sort of like golden application, like what ChatGPT did for the AI space, I think hopefully we'll have something like that. I mean, if you look back at AI, I remember testing like the original, it was like a GPT-2, like some of the very early models that they had back a few years ago, and other AI models. And I mean, night and day. There weren't as many people, even close to what it is today in AI. But as soon as you have ChatGPT, people realize that there's something here. There's a real utility here, and this is a real technology that has a lot of potential. I think we've yet to have that sort of like aha moment, but my hope is that we'll see something like that in the near future.
Well said, Ethan. Where can people get in touch with you?
Of course, you can follow us at Particle Network, Particle NTWRK on Twitter. Of course, my name is Ethan, although I go by the alias Tabasco. On Twitter, that'll be at TabascoWeb3. Our website is particle.network. We do a lot of interactions with the community, a lot of growth campaigns. On my side, I do developer relations, so lots of demos. If you're a developer, then definitely let me know if you want to chat. We do a ton of different videos and tutorials and documentation things that are very centered around cultivating a better developer experience for our wallet as a service and other solutions. So we have a lot coming out. I definitely keep an eye. My big thing is that if you want to learn more about ZK WAS or Intense or anything else, also check out blog.particle.network. I've been posting a ton of content over there. So something to check out as well.
Super interesting stuff, Ethan. Thanks so much for coming on. This was a real pleasure, and looking forward to having you back on because this technology moves so fast, and I appreciate you coming on and keeping me up to speed.
For sure, no problem. Thanks so much for having me. These episodes are super cool, and I'm glad to be part of it again.